Welcome back, Chief.
Thank you for having me back. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you stopping by on your way home from work. I dig the black uniform, the black shirt. That's pretty cool.
Thank you.
Yeah. And now everybody's going to the outer vest, right?
Yes, sir.
That's the big deal. They're talking about that on Reddit. All the younger guys are pushing for vests and to allow beards. I know that was the deal.
Right. And I had some questions to answer for the Midland Reporter Telegram, and one of them was talking about how the growth has affected law enforcement in this area, the growth of Midland, Odessa. And that's one of the things I hit on is we can't compete with the money the oil field or the oil industry pays, but we can do things like allow facial hair, relax tattoo policies, relax some of our educational requirements, more comfortable like a Class D uniform. A lot of the officers would rather have the outer vest with the carriers on the front, so everything's not on their belt, because that causes a lot of hip and back problems in law enforcement.
It does, and also with the increased level of rifle threats, you can wear that chest plate, because my armor, all the armor we had was I think it only went up to 3A, which is pistol, and we didn't have any rifle protection unless we put our SWAT vests on or a carrier. They carried that plate because they're heavy. I mean, they're getting lighter. And it is so nice to have all that gear, because now look at what we're carrying. You know, when I started, it was a pistol, a couple magazines, an asp and handcuffs, and a radio, and then flashlight, then your mic pack, and then some guys have tasers and pepper spray. Just keeps going and going and going.
And then everyone's carrying the tourniquets now.
Oh yeah, so those are. I had one of those. And it got to the point that, I mean, you just don't have anything left, especially when you get somebody with a really small waist.
Right.
You know, they're just too much.
And when people are new to law enforcement, 21, 22-year-olds, male or female, either one, we haven't indoctrinated them into the way law enforcement officers tend to eat through fast food windows. So they've got smaller waists.
Yeah.
And you're asking them to cram all this equipment on there, and you see a lot of back and hip issues after a few years with officers, not to mention that some of them just flat don't have the space to carry this thing. So we're having to pick and choose what they carry and what they don't. And those are things that I would address once I'm in the sheriff's office. That's part of being in the 1980s, stuck in the 1980s, is this traditional, what you and I in our younger years saw as a traditional uniform, the hard badge, the hard nameplate, the vest is hidden under your uniform. You're not showing tattoos. There's no facial hair. And I think part of a way to help retain and attract officers is that you're open to the new modern ways of doing things.
I've been through that so many times. When I first started at the sheriff's office, all these guys I'm going to talk about are retired, but we weren't allowed to wear boots, that lace-up boots.
Right.
We had to wear military low quarters or basically black cowboy boots.
Like the old Wellington boots.
Walking heel,
right,
roper style. And they were slick, and they were a lot of fun when you got in a fight at the jail. And then they had the Vibram soles, but those wore out quick and actually screwed up my feet for a while because of the way it was. And finally they came out with the lace-up roper, which was an ugly boot. But they allowed that, and because they allowed that, then we started wearing the 511s and all. Right. There was this mentality in the 90s not to look the least bit military. And that uniform the sheriff's office has, it scared the hell out of me, especially in the jail, because it is extremely flammable. It's 100% synthetic. It's hot in the summer and it's cold in the winter. And one of our guys was a firefighter that taught institutional firefighting to us. He was a jailer, volunteer firefighter, and he taught us how to use all the firefighting gear, which is a huge thing when you work in the jail. And he put those things on the ground and hit them with a blowtorch, and they just poof.
Right.
And, you know, in aviation and civil air patrol and all, we weren't allowed, in military standard, not allowed to wear synthetics under a flight suit because that's how you get the burns.
Right.
That would go.
So in a lot of cases, the uniforms aren't necessarily even healthy for the officers. They could be a fire hazard, like we said, with all the equipment to the backs and the hips. And one thing that I've heard, some of the Midland County folks, that they have concerns is the lighter colored uniform. So if you're out at night in a dark area, you can be seen easier than if you were in a darker colored uniform. So that brings me to this point. I know people like to have effect on their destiny. They like to have input. They like to have decisions. So Leadership 101, when a new sheriff takes over, and I'm saying sheriff, it could be a police chief or whoever, and you need an image change with the public, and you want to do something and put it out there quick that people can see. We all know you can change the color of the units or the graphics on the vehicle, or you can change the uniform or the patch or the badge. I do believe some of those things need to be done, but I think the employees need to have input on these things. They're the ones that drive the vehicles every day. They're the ones that wear the uniform. So in my mind, put committees together and let them examine, do we really need to change the uniform? If we change it, does it need to be the color or the style or what the fabric is? Same thing with the patch and the badge. Is there anything that we need to change?
Right.
You certainly don't want to change everything because every department, like DPS, and they're a good example of this, they always keep something historical. They've changed their patch a few times and the badge has been changed some, but the uniform itself's pretty much stayed the same for many years now.
Yeah, the base colors. I know the fabric changed at some point.
Right.
But of course, the badge and the patch and all has been like that forever. We when I was in the jail, I was trying to convince an administrator to let us wear the 511 style. They're like slacks, kind of like Dockers, but they have the pockets and they're solid color, they're tan. And he told me, so you're saying you want my jailers to look like jackbooted thugs? And I said, no, they're going to look like firemen. Because that's what Midland Fire Department had gone to, and that's where I saw it because I had a bunch of friends on it. Cotton, not, a freaking wick like this other stuff was. Right. And as a jailer, we carried a lot of crap that there wasn't belt space for, and you had your gloves and you had your list and you had a first aid kit and, whatever you chose to carry. And all those pockets were nice. When I went over to an investigator, I typically wore a polo shirt and those kind of pants. And that's what we wore on SWAT. And a lot of the old guys don't like those. They consider them unprofessional or military looking, and they're fantastic to wear. I loved them. And I've had those pants actually stop a chainsaw blade one time when I was cutting firewood. They're something that the 70s nylon stuff never would have done.
Right.
But
so I say all that to put out there that I believe in letting the employees have a say in their destiny. So I think for things like that, you can have committees and you can go off their recommendations. You pull from supervisory ranks, you pull from the officer ranks, pull from the jail, and get everyone's opinion. The other thing is that I wanted to clarify is I've said in some of my public speeches that there are two people on patrol sometimes.
Yeah.
And Midland County, I know, has a minimum staffing level of 3. But there are times that we have 2 deputies working, and nobody's debated that. No one's argued that. Mm-hmm. I know it happens. I think there are things we can do, and one of the things I've mentioned is look at the task force folks and see if there's any of them that we could bring back. I understand people hear that and they think, oh my gosh, I'm happy with what I'm doing. I don't want to be moved. I say examine the deployment of all the people throughout the department. I'm not saying we're going to move anybody. There may be a need for more people assigned to task force. I don't know. But you certainly have to look at folks assigned to the task force. I'm not saying we're going to jerk all these people back and reassign them to other areas. Same thing with CID, same thing with the jail. If you've got people in the jail that have been through an academy and they're capable, competent police folks, and they can be moved, move them. A lot of them would love to be out on the streets and not in the jail. So I think as a whole, you look at the department and you see what the numbers are and where they are. Now, another thing that I want to examine is how we deploy people. 8-hour, 10-hour, 12-hour shifts. Right now, patrol is on 10-hour shifts. I've never been a big fan, personally, when I was on patrol, of working 12-hour shifts. The younger officers today, the 20-somethings that a lot of us would call millennials, they love the 12-hour shifts.
I've heard that. I don't know if you're on Reddit or not, but there's a group, and I've always talked about it. Folks, you're going to hear me repeat things from other podcasts because this may be the only one that you watch. You may not be a podcast person, but you're interested in what the sheriff candidates have to say, so I'll say it again. But on this forum, there are a lot of young, the millennial-aged officers. And it's funny you mention that because there was recently a post about the 12-hour because the way it can be and the popular way to do it, you're off, was it every third or every other weekend or something like that?
The 12-hour shift that most of the departments in this area are using and that we're using at the universities, a 12-hour shift where they have every other weekend off.
Right.
To a lot of us 70s and 80s officers and maybe some of the 90s officers, that's kind of great because we loved working the weekends. We love getting out and
when
working.
you're young and into it.
Exactly. Well, with a lot of these younger officers today, a lot of it's about time off.
Yeah.
They'll work, they'll get out and they'll do what needs to be done, but they want their time off and they certainly enjoy weekends. And this gives them every other weekend off. They never work more than 3 days straight. Some work weeks are short, some are long. Some days you work 2 days, you're off 2, and you come back and you work 3. But when you have a weekend, it's a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
Yeah, you're really hitting on something there. I think the way I looked at it, we work 10s on patrol. If you're working a 10, you might as well work a 12. Is how I look at it because inevitably, when coming on in the evenings, when I did, an evening shift, as soon as you check in, boom, you're off to a call.
Right.
And many of the time, you're not rolling home at the end of that. You still have stuff to do, and you have to do reports, whatever it is. So we talked about that. You might as well work 12. But there's after your first visit here, on Reddit, a cop posted, it was a plaque he made, or just a frame printout, and he said, "Cops hate the way things are, but they also hate change."
Exactly.
And I see that, and those kind of things were really hard to swing, and I think you do have to shake the trees a little bit and see what works.
Well, personally, like I said, I had never cared for the 12-hour shifts. I've worked them before. One of the shift schedules that we did in Big Spring that was a 12-hour shift, we were off for 7 days straight. When we came back, we were totally out of sync. A lot of people didn't know what had happened or what was going on. So I certainly didn't care for that. And as administrator, that's kind of alarming that your people are that out of touch that long. But the 12-hour shift that a lot of them are working out here is acceptable. It's acceptable to the officers. It's acceptable to management. And our guys love it. My son is at Ector County. They work the same schedule. They love it. The OPD guys, they love it. I know Midland PD's on 12-hour shifts, and I'm not hearing complaints from them. So, again, I say let's put a committee together and examine for us, for Midland County, what would be best, 8, 10, or 12-hour shifts. The big benefit that I saw from the 12-hour shift was it put more officers on the streets without having to reassign anybody, without having to hire anyone. We took the people that we had deployed onto the various 8-hour shifts, pulled them all, divided them up onto 12-hour shifts, and we ended up with more people on patrol. And you can run, if you want to, you can run heavier at night. You can run heavier in the evening. If you've got an extra person or two left over, you can put them on a swing shift that overlap your evening and midnight shift. So I see huge advantages to a 12-hour shift. So my message to Midland County deputies is I'm open to whatever it is. I think there needs to be change. I think most of them thinks there needs to be change. And I'm not saying I want to take everyone's destiny into my hands, because I certainly don't want to make things worse. I want to fix things. I want to make things better. Who else better to go to and get their opinion than the people that have been there doing it and lived it?
And in your committee idea, you mentioned something that's considered sacrilege and often in law enforcement. We were talking about promotion boards and hiring boards and having people from other agencies that do that same job. Mm-hmm. Law enforcement, we're kind of, we get real territorial about that. I love that idea. But also, your committee, that would be a good slot to bring somebody in, say that, Lubbock just went to 12-hour shifts from 10s or 8s or whatever you're doing, and let the officers talk about how it was. Because, when you go to a school with other cops, that's the first thing you're going to do is sit down. We called the game more effed up than you, when you would say, yeah, UTPB, man, our chief makes us do this. Oh, yeah? Well, I was at the DA's office. It's really screwed up. Here's what we did. But you get somebody in there that's actually seen the changes and seen what they've done and all.
I've worked for chiefs and sheriffs both before that their opinion was, we've done it this way for 90 years, let's do it this way for 90 more.
Yeah.
You can't show those tattoos. You can't have facial hair. We're not doing anything but an 8-hour shift. The cars have looked like this for the last 20 years. We're not changing it. Police officers hate change, but at the same time, if they have a say in what the destiny is, what the change is, they welcome it.
That's a good point. I was laughing with some other cops the other day about how somebody was complaining about beards. And I like my beard. It covers up my ugly. And I wasn't allowed to have it until I went to the DA's office. But, when you go back to Victorian, the beards were a thing then they weren't, then they are. And I thought it was funny. There was a guy, a Texas, oh man, I can't remember what he was. He was an administrator of some sorts, a sheriff or a chief or whatever. And he was really trashing the young guys about tattoos and about all that. But I looked up pictures of his agencies, and it's all 400-pound guys dressed like they're headed out to a square dance. Which, what do you want the public to see? And that's one of those things. And I know there's, I've written about it. We're going to do an episode about it. They talk about militarization of police, which is complete crap. We don't have military rules of engagement. We have a totally different mindset, totally different thing to do. But people shoot at us with rifles, and people try to blow us up with IEDs. So we have to respond to it accordingly. So we will wear body armor. We will carry rifles and all that. So I'm not afraid of the vest look. I'm not afraid of lace-up boots or anything like that. It's just my 2 cents on the whole thing. And I think a lot of folks feel that way.
Right. And when I talk about facial hair, even though you may allow it, it's got to be well-groomed and maintained. Yeah. Same thing with tattoos. It can't be on the neck or on the face, and it can't be anything that's offensive to the public.
Right.
But, a lot of this today, in this day and time, with younger folks, you can develop a conversation. They're in, a lot of young people are into tattoos or they're into facial hair. And if you're officers, we're a makeup of our community.
Agreed.
We're not hiring people from Mars and bringing them here.
Right.
We're hiring them out of school, out of high school, out of college, from our communities or another community or two over, and we get them here, and we expect them to be of high moral stature, of course, but they still have to be able to relate to the community. The community needs to feel like these officers are approachable. Mm-hmm. And, we were interviewing a young man the other day from Midland County. He lives in Midland County. And he was talking about kind of the challenges he's found getting into law enforcement. And he said, there have been a couple of times I've been in a restaurant or in a store and saw officers from whatever department it was, and they didn't look approachable. And he said, I so badly wanted to go up to them and ask them, what's your hiring process? How do you like it where you're at? And things like that,
right,
to kind of know how to get his foot in the door. And the officers to him just didn't look approachable. And I think sometimes by humanizing these officers, if they're not with the shiny brass and everything all over their uniform, they're in a
right,
more of a Class D uniform where you've got the cloth badge and the cloth nameplate, and maybe they've got some tattoos, maybe they've got some facial hair, and it humanizes them to these younger people. They may be more approachable, and that's how we want our officers to the public, is approachable.
Yeah, that's good. I'm with you on that. If you think about it now, and you're somebody like me, one of my best friends is a hairstylist, and I have really good hair. It's genetic, and I got this beard, and my wife loves it, and you would have to pay me considerably more money to go in it looking like I did when I was in the Coast Guard.
Right.
And again, do we want a military look or do we not? I always thought that was strange when they would say, no, we don't want you to wear these boots because you look like you're in the military, but shave that goatee because you look like a hippie.
And let me clarify that there are times, certainly, when you're going to federal court, district court, a funeral, things like that, where you want that Class A uniform. You want the shiny badge and the name plate, and you want the tie, and you want the shined Wellington-style boots and the cowboy hat. You want those things.
Yep.
But what I'm talking about is daily wear for the guys out on patrol.
I the cowboy hat thing, when I was in, I think it was in the academy. I believe it was Jim Seavey was my instructor, way before he was a police chief. And he said, we were talking about, it was in a gunfighting school, and he said, look, all you guys with the county, for God's sake, on your way down to the ground, when you hear a shot and you're taking cover, get rid of that hat.
Right.
And also, and I'm tall, I'm 6'4", I didn't fit in a car with a hat. The straw hat, I liked it during the summer when you're working traffic. The winter hat was completely useless. You had to put the plastic cover on it. It didn't cover your ears. You had to wear the little ear things if you wanted those, and take care of it. And they're always a pain. And a toboggan cap was the best thing in the world. I'm not saying we should be allowed to wear like a big Russian Yushenka, but something like that. Just the practicality of it, I think, and I totally dig what you said about uniforms, that there should be a very traditional old school uniform. The agencies, I think it was Iowa or something, I watched a retirement ceremony, and these guys all had carrier vests and things like that. That was their uniform, but they had their color guard in like a 50s era. They almost looked like Mounties with the straps. I thought it was gorgeous, man. It looked great.
So kind of going back to that question from the Midland Reporter-Telegram about how the growth here has affected the departments, these are ways that we can offer incentives to the officers, and it's not necessarily cold hard cash.
Right.
Because you and I know these folks that get in law enforcement, they don't get in it for the money to start with.
Right.
So a lot of times there's a whole lot more at stake there than just the dollars and cents. They want to be paid well. They want to be paid a living wage, but they care about decent equipment, decent vehicles, safety gear, those kind of things. And if you can supply good equipment to them, decent vehicles, the latest in crime fighting gadgets, so to speak, like your MDT and the different technical things they use to make their job easier, they care a lot about that too. So I'm all for doing what we can to make the officer's job easier, make it safer, make us more efficient to the public. At the same time, trying to spend our money or our budget wisely.
Amen.
And a lot of times too, these Class D uniforms save money, because how many times over the years have you seen officers in these scrapes out beside the highway and they've lost their badge, or the back's been tore off the badge, or the state seal was tore off, or the nameplate was destroyed, and then you're replacing those things at a considerable cost.
one of my problems with the synthetic uniform is it was kind of a pain to take care of yourself. I mean, you can wash it, but pressing a synthetic to that crease, the
Right.
look you want in the pockets was a pain. So we had to have them dry cleaned. And inevitably, as soon as you get out of the dry cleaner in August, you got to go direct traffic, and you stink for days. That chemical starts cooking off of them.
Right.
That's something I was happy to see, and we were more relaxed on SWAT. We had a couple of uniforms, and we actually had a PT standard, and we had they're made by the same contractors that make the military uniforms. I forgot the name of the cloth, but it was comfortable, and it was a good way to spend the day over that standard uniform.
Right.
I really liked it.
And then another I want to circle back to real quick is I talked about cold cases.
Right.
And I'm not talking about, because I know daily these detectives, 10, 15, 20 more cases added
Right.
to the 80, 90, 100 cases they've already got. But my goal would be to find a couple of folks that are trained, experienced CID people, detectives, investigators, whatever you want to call them. I think the county calls them investigators.
Yeah, counties, the SO and the DA were investigators, right.
And speaking of the DA's office, maybe even see if we can get a couple of those investigators to come on board with us. And I'm not talking about dig out old criminal mischief cases
Right.
or old theft cases. I'm talking about persons cases, aggravated assaults, sexual assaults. My emphasis would be on murders and or
Right.
missing people that have never been located. Let's dig those things out. Let's get some fresh eyes on them, some experienced eyes, and see if we can cultivate any new leads. Put some of these things back onto Crime Stoppers and get them out in the media to see if even what maybe the case is 25 years old, maybe somebody knows something, or now somebody's willing to say something.
The DA's office is doing that. We looked at a few of those, and they were about the time I retired. They were looking at training a couple of guys in how to do that.
Right.
Give them some specific training, but think about just the technology involved. How many cases as DNA improved? DNA
Right.
extraction over. It got to where we could profile on older and older and older DNA and things that are now that they're more convicted felons,
Right.
and people with their system under court order with their DNA put on file that people are starting to pop up.
Because I feel like as a law enforcement officer, and of course this is my 36th year doing this, we owe it to the public. If there's an unsolved murder or folks that are missing that have not been located, especially if there's foul play suspected, we owe it to the public to try to bring these people to justice. If there's someone wandering around out there on the streets that has murdered somebody, sexually assaulted somebody, or brutally beaten somebody up, they need to be brought to justice.
Right. I'm one of the things that I want to see is more of the agencies playing nice together.
Right.
Because there were times when we were, I kind of want to say admonished, scolded a little bit, maybe for bringing the DA in on something or bringing a specialist, because there's a perception that we're not working together, but we discussed this in your last episode. We don't understand each other
Right.
until we work on the other side. And, I want to come back to that. Let me ask this question before I forget it. We had talked about your promotion ideas, your boards and all like that, which I got to admit, when you said that, I thought, man, that would absolutely never happen unless you became sheriff. And then the more and more I let it sit, the more I thought about what a better idea it is. Because the situation I'm in now with these elections, we talked about this, that I'm not publicly endorsing anyone or anything, even though I'm in a great place to do it. I'm not a moron, but I know all these people and I like all these people. And it harkens back to the day when you're sitting in a an interview board trying to select the next sergeant or next investigator, and they're all three friends of yours. Like, I went to high school with him. I was in a band with him, and he and I went hunting together last weekend. And it's hard. And no matter how disciplined you are, that puts some crunch on you. And I really liked your idea. Well, but what I wanted to ask you specifically at the sheriff's office right now, okay, when I left, and as far as I know, it's right now, it is kind of taboo to say, be a patrolman, then become an investigator, and then go back to patrol as a sergeant. There was sort of a wall there between these divisions that people didn't move around. The way I see things, it seems pretty valuable. Systems like the PD uses and some others, where you can go from a street cop to a detective back to a sergeant because you have a more well-rounded view of how things go.
Well, one thing that I've been told recently is that if you're on patrol as a sergeant and you want to move to detectives to CID, you've got to give up your sergeant rank and take an investigator's position.
Right. Yeah. Unless it's a sergeant opening. I think so.
For me, being sheriff, once you promote to sergeant, you're a sergeant. Whether you're working in patrol, you're working in the jail, you're doing one of the school resource programs, whatever it is, a sergeant's a sergeant's a sergeant. And by the way, that's a sergeant with authority, not some of these silver badge sergeants that we have now that are sergeant in title only with no authority.
Yeah.
How that could ever be allowed to happen, I don't know. And there's infighting sometimes because a Gold Star sergeant, someone you might say has authority, is working with a sergeant with title only, no authority, and the guy with the authority directs this other sergeant with no authority to do something. There's some infighting there sometimes.
That was a thing, and that was, as I understand it, I'm probably going to mess this history up completely, but some of the grant positions or task force, I believe, carried with it a higher pay. And the only way they could get that through at the time was to make that person a sergeant, and it's something like that.
And I've been told some of that continued with, there weren't step increases or ways to give folks raises, so they would give him a title. He's now a sergeant. Now he gets this 3 or 4% pay raise.
That was the thing.
But there's no authority. That's got to stop.
Right.
A sergeant's got to be a sergeant with authority.
That does have to mean something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And lieutenants have to be lieutenants. And once you have rank in that department, no matter where you move, you hold that rank. You don't have to relinquish that rank just because you want to go and be in CID or wherever it is.
Yeah.
As long as there's an opening for a supervisor in that area.
Oh, yeah, as long as you slot over.
Right. But I know in the past there's some folks that have been told, well, if you leave patrol as a sergeant and you go to CID, you start all over, so to speak.
Yeah, if it was not a sergeant slot, that was kind of a thing. And you're looking at a system more like the military, and it is a different kind of work than the military, but I do like how fluid the military's structure is. And we talked about this with Rebecca, and in regards to big dockets, large caseloads in courts, and then alludes to what you were saying about cold cases, is no matter how good an investigator is, you can make mistakes by keeping a case too long. You know, if it's cold or somebody's in prison or for whatever reason, you got to work on it, and you slide it over to the next guy, and that fresh eye, it just kind of jumps out at you. And we tend to sort of get into, we talked about it before, the institutional inbreeding. We've always done it that way. Mm-hmm. And you don't give up your case, and you don't get any input. You don't share it with anyone. There's, everything's just held so tight to the chest for no reason. And in my opinion, again,
right.
that this tends to kind of go south.
Right. So. And there again, the old 80s law enforcement mentality's always been, we've done it this way for 90 years, let's do it this way for 90 more. That's why the policy manual at Midland County is from 1985.
Yeah.
everyone knows it. Again, out in public, nobody's debating that fact. It's the way it is. And you can't say you're going to fix the problem when you're there.
Right.
And Sheriff Painter has been gone since May, and the policy manual's still outdated.
Yeah. We discussed that and how the mentality's changed from policy creates liability by forcing you to buy into something to how now it protects you. And
Exactly.
I think we talked about we used the example last time, I think, about the patrol districts, how the district was a physical chalk line down the middle of Midland County, which is 349, Big Spring Street.
Right.
And that was the JP district
Right.
up until the gerrymandering thing was done. It was divided into 4 by population. And as far as I know, the patrol district is still like that, which you put one guy in each district and one kind of floating around, irrespective of, if you look at the technology, things we can do now, we can, Cliff, one of my best friends, is a crime analyst, and we're at the point in technology where we can damn near see into the future a little bit, and we can apply people
Right.
to that, I think.
And I know that's the pipe dream, that there's 4 precincts and you either have 4 districts, 4 sectors, 4 precincts, whatever you choose to call them. And there's one person per area.
Right.
And then you have a floater or a rover.
Right.
That put 5 people out there.
Right.
And you need to put a supervisor, a sergeant out there with
Right.
those 5 people.
Agreed.
And you need to have a mandated minimum staffing level, and you need to stick to it. And if there's people out sick and there's people in training and in the things that happen every day in law enforcement, you need to bring
Right.
people in on overtime, be willing to pay that overtime, or somehow adjust schedules where you have that minimum staffing level out there so the officers are safe and the public's safe. Scrunching it down to 2 officers to work this 900 and something square foot
Yeah.
county's not a good thing.
The
Square miles. I'm sorry, I said square
Yeah.
foot. Square miles.
960 something square miles. Yeah. I dig what you're saying. Here's how it would happen. You got 3 guys. Okay. And you got a shift where at the time, I know it's different now, one of the benefits of the county is we had a lot of leave. So you get to bank your holidays. So if you work on Independence Day, you can take Independence Day anytime the next year. And then, man, I think by 10 years, I was getting like close to 3 weeks. Plus you can take 3 personal days out of your sick leave. So there's a lot of leave that these guys have to burn.
Right.
And so now you've got a shift with 6 people or 8, however many, counting supervisors. Every day there's always 3. Every day. Whether it's Friday or Saturday or Tuesday and it snows, there's 3 people. What's the first thing that happens at 5 o'clock? We come on at 4:30 is something happens on Interstate 20. And that's going to suck up at least 1, usually 2 officers, because you got to shut down an interstate and there's so much going on. Now you got 1 guy shagging calls and instant officer safety issue everywhere.
Right.
And you can't, sure, there's DPS or constables, there's other guys. They all got jobs too, so you can't count on them, not because of ethics, just because of reality. So I would love to see that 5, and I would love to see the districts set up where they're safer for
Right.
everybody. I really would.
Right.
That'd be cool.
You can't put a price on doing things the right way.
Yeah.
Sometimes it may cost a little more money, but if you're doing things the right way, it's going to save you money in the end. It could potentially save an officer's life. It will keep them from doing dangerous things when they're in a hurry. Code 3 to get to a call clear across the county, kind of like we talked about last time, the deputy that tried to get around the train.
Yeah.
It keeps them from taking unnecessary chances.
Yeah.
And you assign an officer to each area, and hopefully you've got someone in that area during this emergency that's available, so your first officer's not coming from across the county and, again, taking those unnecessary chances. So,
yeah, that was a part of it. And then you got to take time and you got to work, the old school community policing thing, and you got to cover traffic and all that too.
and
right?
going back to retaining our officers, you're wearing them out.
Yeah.
I can tell you a municipality in our area right now that we're getting a lot of our officers from at the university. I won't name names, but they're wearing their guys out.
Yep.
They're running 12-hour shifts. They're having mandatory overtime for their folks. Guys aren't getting their days off, and their spouses are getting tired.
Oh, yeah.
They're getting tired. And, the old saying, when mama's not happy, nobody's happy.
Yeah.
And that's the same way when the spouse is the female's the police officer, and the husband
Yep.
Is the civilian in the relationship, and he's trying to take care of kids and his job, and the wife's working all the time.
Yep.
So you've got to keep not only the officers happy, but you've got to keep their families happy.
I think it's funny, this has come up in the last few of the election episodes, that we're no longer in the time where somebody goes to work at a job and does the same thing for 50 years and gets a gold watch and leaves. And you can crap on the millennials and the kids today or whatever. It doesn't matter. That's the way it is. Things move and people move. And I'm 49, and there's like a 5-year cycle where you're already kind of starting to look over the fence and where you can go, because a lot of your effective people are always moving.
Right. And for the younger people today, they're not as much worried about money, and they're not worried about retirement or your insurance benefits or whatever. They're worried about what paycheck they're getting that week, that month to put in the bank. But even moreover than that, they're concerned with their time off, and they're concerned with how they're being treated. They don't want to work every day of the week like some of us used to have to make ends meet or make things happen. And they don't like to do a whole lot of overtime, not only on patrol, but these second jobs that as police officers, most of us always had 2 or 3 jobs on the side. I've got some young folks that work for me now. They want to work their job, and they'll do whatever it takes to do it. And if they need to occasionally work overtime, they will. But they don't go out and cultivate second and third jobs. They want to work their primary job, and the rest of it's family time.
Yes, sir. I like what you're saying there, and I think there's the reason that that officers tend to gravitate toward the things with more free time and all now is, if you think about in modern times, back in the old days, one of my sea daddies, Lieutenant Jerry Baggs at the sheriff's office, he helped me get into law enforcement. He was telling me, talking about all the training we had to have. This is in the 90s, he said this. So back in my day, if you were 18 and big enough and mean enough to carry a badge and a gun, you got the job. And so people started earlier. Well, we're starting later because pretty much everyone winds up in maybe a couple of years of college, or they go off to the military. And so it seems to me we're recruiting older people by a few years. And that puts you in that notch where you don't want to live your job, where you're now ready to start a family or, incorporate other things and spend some time. So I hear a lot of people talk about that tendency like it's a laziness. And generational differences aside, I think it's just the point in a person's life where they're like that. Because, in my day, you're thinking about that about the time maybe you want to hit detective or something. Man, I'd love those banker's hours and have dinner with my wife every night or whatever.
Well, a while ago we were talking about hobbies and things, and a lot of the 70s and 80s police officers, they had no hobbies. Their job was their hobby.
Right.
And as much as you appreciate the dedication, when somebody's married to a job like that and something goes bad for them, they're devastated. If they don't get that promotion, if they've made some type of mistake and somebody takes discipline. I've had the worst cases of officers that are married to the job that don't have anything outside of the job to occupy their time, and you have to discipline them, and it's devastating. I mean, it's like the end of the world to them.
I learned that job can't be your identity.
Right.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
So it's good that these guys and gals are developing hobbies and interest in things outside of law enforcement. How many officers have you known that if you asked them about how many friends they had or who they were, well, it's officer here and officer there and an officer from that department.
Yeah.
it's all police people.
I was in a clique like that of young officers. We hung out together. We went out together. We lived in the same apartment complex. And one day you realize these are all great people, but that's everything in my world. It's like being in the military.
Right.
You know, where you live next door to the guy in the next cubicle or whatever.
And you want, the community wants, and as administrators, you want a well-rounded police officer.
Yeah, yeah. You do, and people, it was really strange being a musician. There weren't very many of us doing that would be out playing in a club, and people like, wait, that guy's a cop? How does that happen? I go, well, I was done being a cop at 5 o'clock.
Right.
And, I'm not up here, shooting heroin like Motley Crue or anything. I'm going to play my gig and I'm going to have fun and I'm going to sweat and leave it on stage and go home. But, which I want to go to this because you're so far the only candidate we've talked to. We haven't gotten into this. How do you decop yourself at the end of the day or weekend or whatever?
Well, as a young police officer, I can tell you that I was 24/7 gun-toting, rootin'-tootin', crime-fighting machine.
Bleeding blue.
My first couple of years of law enforcement. And I associated with primarily police officers. I worked anytime they would allow me to work. We used to stay, and when we'd work evening shift, we'd get off at 11 o'clock, and we'd volunteer to stay over and ride with another officer.
Yeah.
Back in the days, you could do that. And we'd work till 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, get up and come back and do it again the next day at 3 o'clock.
Yep.
But, luckily years went by. I met my wife, and of course, for officers that do find their spouse early on, that tends to make them change somewhat.
Yeah.
And another point in my life where I changed was, of course, when we had our children, but then when you have grandchildren, and the grandchildren really cause you to change. So,
Yeah.
Getting out, doing things with the grandkids, enjoying time with them, going to the park, doing birthdays and things. And as you become a grandparent, you really see things through a different lens. You realize how precious life is, and you kind of become a kinder, gentler individual, really. And I think me having been the chief for the last several years at UTPB, coupled with being a grandfather now, you have more compassion for people.
Yeah.
Where, 20 years ago, you might have said, throw them in jail.
Us and them.
Yeah, us and them.
Yeah.
You look at things differently. You understand. I was out working, and I still get out occasionally and work at night with my officers and things, which I believe the sheriff of the county should get out. Gary Painter got out, and he would work at night.
Yeah.
And there, while you stay in tune with what's going on in the community, you see what challenges your officers are facing and what's going on at night. The other side, every community's got a daytime face and a nighttime face.
Right.
But I'm out working at night, and one of my guys had made a traffic stop, and he took off. Well, my son, who works for Ector County, come up. I talked to him briefly, and by the time I turned around and headed back towards the university, I see a vehicle parked at elementary school. Wasn't there when I came by the first time, so, my mind, is this a burglar or what is it? Pull around and check on it, and it's 6 young people in a vehicle, all under 21, with alcohol in the vehicle. Parents both from Midland and Odessa.
Yeah.
So I get them out, and to be honest with you, it was a 12-pack, and they had only opened a couple of cans of the alcohol, and you could see where they spilt it all over the floors. And I truly don't think any of them had drank, and if they had, it was a sip or two.
Yeah.
So, as a young police officer, I probably would have started writing citations out. The guys that were between 17 and 21, still not old enough to have alcohol, but old enough to go to jail, I probably would have locked them up. The kids that were 15, 16 years old would have been released to parents with citations. I called all the parents. I had all the parents come and get these young people, and the parents were very appreciative. The kids were appreciative. I've even had some of them recontact me since then to express their appreciation for what I did. And I really think a couple of these guys learned some things out of this incident. There's more to just putting people in jail. And as you get older, you see that. And I think having also been chief of police at a university, you learn real quick there are other options besides write a citation, put people in jail all the time. And I think sometimes we can lose sight of the fact that by doing what we do sometimes, we could change the course of somebody's life.
Indeed, yeah.
You know, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. And I believe sometimes that depending on what the crime is, or sometimes it may be not even a crime, but almost a crime, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, yeah.
The way we handle that, you know, we call the parents to come get them. We look outside the box in how we handle folks and how we. It's the same thing, and I'll bring this up: the mentally ill.
Yeah.
You know, for so many years, a mentally ill person urinates in public. You can tell he needs to be in a facility. He needs some mental health help, maybe in crisis. And because of lack of anything else to do, and it's 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, we load the guy up and we put him in jail. And of course, he's beating on the bars and causing problems in the jail, and maybe assaults somebody in the jail cell with him, or he hurts himself when he really didn't need to be in jail to start with. So Midland would have my commitment to look at things like what we're doing with people with mental challenges.
I think that's finally going to a better place. I saw that kind of kick off, and there were times when you couldn't do it, and if they weren't a threat to themselves, there was nothing you could do.
Right.
You just couldn't.
Yeah, and I use Live PD as a good example right now. A ton of people. Sheriff Chody in right outside Austin, the county right outside Austin, Williamson County.
Well, yeah, okay.
You know, Cops was there for a while, and he would host watch parties. There are a lot of people watching Live PD right now, really enjoy it, really like it. You know, I watch it off and on, and sometimes I see officers on there, and they do a great job handling some situations. Then there's some situations where they've got this person that may have a little alcohol, and some jurisdictions don't have public intoxication, like Arizona. When I was there, there's no such thing as public intoxication. So you've got this person that's had a couple of drinks, plus there's some mental illness added onto that, and they've been in traffic or throwing rocks at cars or acting strange. Yep. And you can tell by looking at the officer, he's thinking, I'm on national TV. I've got no reason to put this person in jail. We've got no mental health resources. Now I'm going to get in my car and drive off and leave this person beside the road. And as a police chief, I'm sitting there going, oh my gosh, you know, here we go, leaving this person beside the road. I'm glad this isn't my guy, because if this person jumps in front of a car or jumps off that overpass that's in the background, there you go with liability.
Yep.
So we've got to work together. The courts, law enforcement, mental health professionals, we've all got to start working together and finding ways, with the lack of resources we have now, to think outside the box and figure out what we're going to do, because we're only seeing more and more mental health issues.
I think that'll continue, and I don't understand the whole problem. I can tell you it is far worse than when I was a street cop, and even into when I was an investigator. I have no idea where that's going to go. So, in government, it's just historically, we're always behind the curve.
One thing in my mind, Matt, is I know Midland Sheriff's Office has mental health deputies.
Right.
Let's make them all mental health deputies. Let's get every person that works patrol that mental health training. It will take a while to get it done, but it's doable.
How long is that? I forgot.
Well,
I know
originally it was 40 hours.
Okay.
And I don't know if it's been watered down some since then, but you know what? 40 hours, that's a drop in the bucket compared to, you know, if you could save somebody's life potentially.
Yeah, there's I don't understand how to articulate this. A lot of them. Okay, back earlier days. I'm gonna do an old fart story here. It seemed like when a family had somebody with some kind of a mental challenge, I feel like back when I was in grade school and the kids like that were in school, like their families sort of corralled them a little better and got the help they needed and all. And now it's up to the police, it seems like. I can't think of how many people who had disorders when they would have an outburst or go crazy. Everybody would run outside and call the cops.
Right. You know, I use an analogy of a county not too far from here a few years ago, 5-6 years ago. One of their deputies was killed. And the guy went to work. He had kind of an episode at work, probably some drugs, maybe definitely alcohol, maybe some drugs on board. He had mental health issues. The boss sends him home. He goes to the local grocery store, has a meltdown in the store. The manager kicks him out of the store. He goes to the city swimming pool. This is during the summer. Starts, and this is a 30 or 40-something-year-old man, starts messing with the young girls at the pool. Two of them become so afraid they leave the pool, walk home, and tell the parents.
Yep.
The parents call the police. Finally, somebody calls after all these missed opportunities, work, the grocery store, the swimming pool. Nobody calls law enforcement. These parents finally call law enforcement. 2 officers are dispatched. The officers, in looking for this person after talking to the parents, one of them locates a wanted subject unintentionally. You know how things happen.
Yeah.
He transports to the jail. The other officer stays in the area, locates the subject. To make a long story short, the officer shot and killed. He's there by himself. That officer would probably still be here today if we hadn't had all these missed opportunities of somebody getting involved and picking that phone up and calling the police.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, August 31st, the active shooter in Odessa, before that guy was fired from his job and everything transpired from there, I guarantee you within the few hours before that or the day before that, there was probably some indicator where somebody probably should have picked up the phone and called the police.
The officer you were talking about in the prior case, it was my team that put hands on that guy. And yeah, that was terrible. Never will forget that. And when you get into the management of law enforcement, here's what's weird. We just gave 2 examples, 2 experienced cops, 2 guys who've been on the streets, who've been behind desks, who've been leaders. One is where people call the cops too much, and where they don't call the cops enough.
Right.
And what do you do here? Yeah.
Well, my philosophy's always been, if something doesn't look right to you, call the police, call law enforcement. That's what we're here for. That's our job.
Yeah.
You know, I'd rather be safe than sorry.
And, you know, typically if it's BS, it's quick. Let's see, you were in here before Christmas, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So we made the Krampus, the big Krampus display, you know, the Christmas demon from Europe. You know about him?
No.
Yeah. So this is long time ago, you had St. Nicholas who gave toys to all the good kids. Well, in Germany and Austria, you had Krampus, who was the anti-Santa. So not only did you not get presents from Santa, Krampus would come and beat you with reeds. And he's this kind of goat-looking demon guy. Well, my wife's German. And we made a Krampus, and we stood him up in there, and he was there 6 hours, and somebody called the cops on him. And I've got a picture of it. It's on another episode. And it was a BS call. It was a weird call. They said somebody's wearing a goat head standing in front of this guy's house. They knew it was my house, so they were kind of concerned. Maybe something weird was going on, somebody after me. And they made the call and had a laugh and took a picture with our Krampus, and they all left. And that's better than not reporting it and all that. But at the same time, if they would have had eyes on it for more than driving by, they would have seen it was essentially a mannequin. But
right.
anyway. All right, Chief, I know we're coming up against our hour. We need to keep this one down. And also, I've recorded twice a day. My batteries are dying. But anything coming up? You guys have a debate? Midland College, what day?
We have, I believe it.
I forgot. Mid-February, right?
It's this coming week.
Oh, it's while I'm in Houston. Yeah, it's somewhere between the 11th and the 14th.
The forum at Midland College is at February 12th. Starts at 7:00.
Okay, and this one's not a debate. This is the forum where the public can ask questions, right? Okay.
Right. Where they'll have us kind of introduce ourselves in a quick overview, and then the public can ask questions. And then the following day, Thursday, February 13th, at the Greenwood Volunteer Fire Department, there's a forum there that starts at 7:00.
Okay.
And it'll be a similar thing where we kind of tell about ourselves, and then
I had heard about
folks
that,
can ask questions. So both Wednesday, if you can't make Wednesday night at Midland College, then there's Thursday night at the the Greenwood Volunteer Fire Department, and the public's invited to both.
Yeah, Greenwood, and I'm guessing they're probably going to feed you too, because firemen eat. So I heard about that. I think they're cooking, right?
I'm not sure about that.
I may be confusing this. I'm going to be in Houston, Texas, between surgery and infusion, but I'll be back right after that. I forgot, again, my short-term memory is wiped out by a period of heavy drug use called chemotherapy. Somebody I had talked to this week, another candidate, said we were just discussing who's running and what's going on, very cordial. And they said Tom Hain's sign game is strong. You got signs everywhere. And so let's see, you have a website, correct? Or are you just doing yours through Facebook?
Facebook and Instagram.
Facebook and Instagram. Yeah, if you just search Tom Hain in Midland, it'll come up. And I'll always put I don't put Facebooks in here, Facebook links, because the two don't get along, so just look him up on Facebook. The Van Cave, this podcast is also on Facebook. We are the Van Cave on YouTube and thevancave.com, which links to our audio, and you can look for us and tell your folks this, if you would, Chief. Pretty much any podcast format, people who listen, if you listen to music, Spotify, things like that, search us, we're probably there. Huge thing I want to put, and I will chapter mark this. We forgot to mention this in your first episode here, and Cliff brought it up. This election between the sheriffs is going to be decided in the primary vote on March 3rd. So if you're just looking for election day, as you could show, if you don't vote in the primaries, you could show up and your guy won't even be on there.
Right. Yeah.
So
early voting starts February 18th, 1/8, and then goes through the 28th. And then election day is March 3rd.
March 3rd.
And there's 4 people running. We're all running Republican.
Right. That's you, David Kreiner, Roy McKinney, and Joe Lozano, right?
Yes, sir.
Cool. And I appreciate you coming in. I know we kind of had to crunch things up. You were going to come in later in my new medical schedule, and you caught you on the way home. But I appreciate it. Thank you very much, and I wish the best of luck, and I hope you manage to sleep. I know how busy you guys are.
Well, I know, and I want to throw in one disclaimer. This is Dasani sparkling water.
Oh, yeah. This stuff, the blood orange that my wife likes, that's good stuff, and if you hate drinking water, that's a good way to do it, I think. Yeah. Did you like it okay? I kind of pushed it on you. I wanted you to try it. I'm drinking tea today again. I'm on decongestants and anti-inflammatories. I blew my hip up again, so if I drink beer on top of that, it'll make me queasy. But anyway, we can still toast. Chief, thank you. Good to see you again.
Thank you, Matt.
Best of luck, and we'll see you back around.
Thank you.
Got it.